Well, hello everybody, and welcome to again to the Transposition Podcast. This is episode number two, and I am here with my great friend Drew. Drew, I haven't yet asked you to be a co-host. We're not there quite yet, but first two episodes, and here we are. So let's say in the future, I would ask you to be a co-host. I mean, would you do it?
Well, there was a certain time when being Facebook official was like the thing, right? And now it's podcast co-hosting. That's
Yeah.
the next
Okay.
level. That's the modern era.
Okay, yeah, we'll see if we can take it there. Um, Drew, you are a music educator. If you, by the way, if you didn't listen to our first episode, it might be helpful to go back and find that one. We will be picking up on some of those themes today, but we'll try and keep it accessible, you might say. But Drew, you are a music educator. Tell people just a little bit more about yourself, especially some of your work, where to find you online.
Yeah, so offline, I wave my hands and a stick and I point at kids and I tell them to stop playing so loud and ooh, that sounds flat. And I help balance bands. And I'm a band teacher, mostly surviving out of tune hot cross buns renditions. And I'm due for an audiologist examination sometime this year after this is my 12th year teaching band.
Wow.
I teach in international schools. I live overseas, originally from the United States, but this is my 8th year living abroad in the Middle East currently, teaching at an American international school. And I have an academic background in ethnomusicology as my Master of Arts degree, and that combined with my interest in um, the meaning crisis, as discussed by folks like John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau and Paul Vanderklay and Jordan Peterson. Um, I've been exploring a thesis, what is music? I realized when I started learning about the world's music traditions that music is way bigger than I studied in school, and it's way bigger than what I teach my own students. And that led me to my own kind of let's call it a deconstruction of what I thought music was, and it's to the point that I don't know what music is. That's sort of been my catch line. I'm the music teacher that doesn't even know what music is, and I've been going back to the basics, like thousands of years, even tens of thousands, depending on some sources, just trying to rebuild um, what is music? What's the concept mean? What does it do? Um, what's it for? Why do we have it? Um, with the At first, it was no particular aim in mind. Um, just sort of just a curious. It's a really curious line of investigation that takes you into so many fa interesting facets of history. So just by just exploring this one question, I've learned so much about world history and culture and things like that. Um, but also with the hope that I would reintegrate at some point into my teaching to help my students become better thinkers about the world and give them a lens for seeing themselves in the world. And currently, where that journey has taken me is music is very close to the things of God and the things of heaven and the things that unite and harmonize heaven with earth. And it, it it does thousands of things, but one of those things that probably unites the thousands of things together is um, it harmonizes so much for us beyond tapping your foot and beyond singing in harmony and producing instrumental harmonies. It harmonizes us with our time. It harmonizes people together, and it harmonizes us with the divine. And so that's been where my thinking has been. Where people can find me currently, I'm somewhere on X uh, at Musicology 253, and I have a Substack that's like in stasis. I have a couple pieces out there, but it's mostly everything I've written is in draft form. And so I thank you for the opportunity for me to think out loud on transposition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've read even some of those drafts, had the privilege, and there's some exciting stuff there. I may even pull some of those things out today. One of the things I really appreciate that you just said, and is kind of a marker of your work, something that I would say probably differentiates you from deconstructing music, but I see why you're saying it's similar, but it's the looking upwards.
Hmm.
You said I found out. So you just said something like this. I found out that this was a bigger question, so that implies that there's something up, and that's one of the things I want to talk about on this podcast is let's look up together and see if we can receive something down, something of heaven down to earth. And so, man, there's so many themes I want to pick up on. I feel like we had a hard time. I don't know how many times we'll be able to talk per year, but I think it's always going to be a problem for us. How do we narrow down all these things that we should talk about? But today, I think we have a good heading for us. I want to talk about this concept of the world being de-musicked. De-musicked. What an interesting term. You've told me about that before. You've talked about that before. Describe what that's like. One of the things I really liked about our last conversation, and one of my goals for this, I would love for my mom to be able to understand what we're talking about, and also us to get into some deep things in the world, some academic things, some intellectual things. But give us a big frame but break it down, that this question of the world being demusicked. What do you mean by that at kind of a base level, and why should my mom care?
This is the second time I've vicariously addressed your mom. So the term de-musicked is actually comes from Oliver Sacks. I think it's his book Musicophilia, and he documents case study after case study of brain patients, basically people with different neurological disorders. And there's one woman, I think she was a music teacher, in fact, who lost her ability to teach music, to sing because of a traumatic brain injury of some sort. And this patient, this teacher, described her life as becoming demusicked. And that word gets picked up by totally different person, David Brooks, the New York Times columnist,
Hmm.
who writes in a piece about how he came to how he came to faith in in God through Christianity, um, from studying the Bible, and then he writes I think a really beautifully written sort of autobiography of his, if we can call it a conversion experience. It was sort of a long-term thing for him, but he uses that term, and he says that his life was remusicked, almost as if
Hmm.
he was like he at first wasn't able to hear and see and perceive the beauty that was around him in the same way that this teacher lost that ability, right? But he sort of like regained he gained it anew, and in a way he started seeing the same things, but in this new light, in this new color, in this new coherent, beautiful, just way of seeing and knowing and things like that. So he described his life as becoming remusicked. So um, I'll just go right into it. Um, so music, the music of the spheres, a lot of people have heard of that concept, the music of the spheres. It's a Pythagorean term. It's discussed by all the major Greek writers. And the essential thesis is that the original discovery was the Pythagoreans noticing that these simple ratios, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, um, these ratios are the basis of reality.
Mm,
and they really liked these simple ratios, and they noticed that musical harmonies corresponded with planetary motions, astronomical phenomena, and so it's one. So the continuum between music and the stars. That's one. That they are of the same sort.
mm,
And so to perceive music, you are in some sense touching the same reality. There's a through line that connects you to the stars, to the
mm,
cosmos. And so and you'll see all sorts of really fantastic depictions of this, folks like Robert Flood and the alchemists and people from the Renaissance up until now, the Hermeticists, like they tried um, depicting this through really interesting illustrations where you have Earth or the sun and all the planets, and they also assign intervals or notes of a
mm,
scale
mhm,
to each of the planets, and so it's a motif. The music of the spheres is a motif that comes up again and again and again in math treatises by polymaths. Kepler is an example, um, to philosophers who are interested in cosmology and the origin of the cosmos and such like that. And we became when we became more scientifically literate in the West and globally in general, we sort of traded that language of a music of the spheres, a harmonized cosmos, to the modern scientific materialistic universe. So basically, we went from cosmos to universe, is how I've heard it described before. I'm not sure if your mom is still following what I'm saying because I've been saying a lot,
No,
but
but that really simple thing, I think that's a good kind of nugget there, going from cosmos to universe. You can see at least that that's one kind of step down, but then, how much did we lose in that step? And what are the things to consider if everything began to think of yeah, you use the word reality. If everyone began to think of reality more that way, more universe, less cosmos, there's really quite a few implications that are right there in the way our minds work, in the way that we talk to each other, well, in the way that we harmonize with each other. There is some implications there. Um, so yeah, I think she's following along.
so that move from cosmos to universe is a demusicking kind of move. And that's not to say we are not amazed at the universe. That's not to say that people don't look at what comes out of the Webb telescope and be amazed at that. But I would say that our amazement at it is not a product of universe. That's a product of cosmos.
Hmm.
That the human characteristic of being in awe of something is um, is not from the scientific frame that got us to the universe. Uh, so so this is where disenchantment comes into the conversation, right? And so if if all that matters in reality is matter and motion, right? Glenn Scribner talks about that a lot. If everything just reduces to matter and motion, and purpose is not really part of that. All you have are causes. It's just one cause after another cause. There's no telos at the end of it that's either pulling you in a direction, or there's no purpose that's pushing in a certain direction. Um, then uh, well, that's classically what disenchantment is when you realize that I have no purpose, right? And so the rug gets pulled from underneath you. Um, with the cosmos, there's an orientation, and you sort of know where to look. Um,
Mm.
w- when when everything is just causes with no telos, with no purpose, You don't know where you're going. And when you don't know where you're going, you're lost. And that gives you a sense of disorientation, um, right? Disoriented. And so purpose is an orientation. Purpose means you know where you're going. When you don't know where you're going, you just don't know what to do with yourself, right?
Hmm.
Um, so you asked me a question. When we stopped seeing the universe musically, like that de-musicking thing, did that happen before the disenchantment? And I thought that was a really interesting question. Um, and
So
it all sort
was
of,
this on X or something?
this
I
was in a
remember
chat.
this. I remember
We
this,
were
but
DMing, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting question, and I think logically it makes sense is when you take out the purpose structure, the structure of purpose and the way to orient your life, then that final sort of disenchantment where you cease to see the reality around you as serving some form of higher purpose that's calling you in.
Hmm.
Um,
Calling you up.
the yeah, calling you up. Yeah, I think th this is why I've made the argument that people who retain musicality, people who continue to do the things of music and love the things of music as a secular materialist in that sense, that is a big incoherence.
Mm.
This is something that C.S. Lewis leans into on his meditation on a tool shed, or Life in an Atomic Age, excuse me, where he talks about it makes no sense for the atheists to derive so much pleasure and meaning from music. They have to, they need to stop pretending. Like they need to remind themselves that, oh, this doesn't mean anything.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think the music is one of those things that grounds us in a cosmos because music is itself a cosmos. And um, I mean, we can get into it on a very musicological level and a music theoretical level on why it does that, but it's fundamentally an orienting um, process, the musical process. When you're getting into a song and listening to it,
Mm.
there's a lot that's happening that's orienting you in and bringing you into this participation where you yourself need to join the song. You're calibrating your senses and finding that place to fit in. And that process is that's more about purpose and telos than it
Hmm.
is just causes and causes and causes without purpose.
Right. Yeah, because yeah, music, you might say naturally works that way. It strikes me, this is maybe just, you know, for maybe this will be a little bit of inside baseball and is a maybe a little bit of an aside, but it strikes me just for those that are trying to discuss disenchantment. One advantage of using De-Musicked is, enchantment seems to be at the level of narrative and storytelling. When you think of enchantment, you think of, fairy tales and it seems to be in this space above natural, this space, it's in the metaphysical because it's storied, and we're very suspicious of the storied world today. But music, again, it seems to be in the world. It's like this that place, that meeting place where we're like where we launch into the story world, but it's still like you said with Pythagoras, it's still we notice the ratios, and my goodness, they sound so pleasing. And here I am crying, just listening to a piece of classical music. And so it's very difficult. It does become, and this is kind of where we left off a little bit last time. It is very difficult to say that all that's happening is chemicals because it's so, versus Disenchanted. It's somehow a little easier for us today to write that off. I don't know if that makes sense if you see that, why adding De-Musicked to the Disenchanted discourse. that's a helpful thing, I think, for people because of the way that they experience music and going to a concert and being so in it. Whereas a story, you can kind of be like, that's just a story. But we're a little less comfortable, aren't we, saying that's just music. It seems like, well, wait, hey, don't knock music, man. Music is so cool. Um, so yeah, that just struck me as you were saying that.
Yeah, music is one of those things where if you ask anybody what they think about music or feel about music, I mean, mo most people usually have some kind of poetic expression, of how much a certain song means to them, or
Yeah.
oh man, that band or that album or that song was there for me when I was at my lowest moment. We're married. We get married to songs. We have all sorts of
Yeah.
feelings about songs and music that it's there accompanying everything we do. And even we've talked about recording technology and sound technology and what that's done to us. But one of the things that modern sound and music technologies has done is we have a soundtrack for everything. Now,
hmm
for better or worse,
hmm
we have a playlist for anything.
So so let's jump in here a little bit to maybe this next problem. Let's say that we have someone, we'll kind of theorize about someone who has maybe started to be convinced that there is this non-material world and it's real. In our last conversation, we left off talking about psychedelics. We didn't touch it, and actually still we won't today, but we can see as kind of a general pattern today with where we're at. There's people who are, they'll start to reach for words, oh, I'm spiritual but not religious, right? And that's happening in all sorts of ways. People are coming to that, like I said, through psychedelics, but also through music. People are becoming dissatisfied with the description all the time of the purely material world. It's becoming, even more memed about to say this is so annoying when people reduce things to material reality.
Hmm.
But they're only at that level where so the world is spiritual. It is full of spirits, but then even that is not an orientation. Well, it is an orientation, but I guess I would argue it's not enough of one. With the psychedelics example, people run out of taking those over and over again as they seek to find out what all the spiritual things in the world are all about. It becomes oppressive in and of itself for it to be just purely open, all the spirits. Now I realized the world is a spiritual place, but there's a way that can crush us, can put so much pressure on us. I mean, it might be wonderful for a time. We might have an open mind, but we also need to close it on something, and we need to be able to discern the spirits. I had a verse
Mm.
um pulled up here actually that I that just came to mind as I was thinking about this earlier. In First John 4, John says, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist. Okay, we're not going to get into the Antichrist today. Sorry, everybody. Which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world. And so I think that is where folks will find themselves if they are at this place where now I will need to discern, to test the spirits, and how do I even go about doing that? Um, yeah, how does that hit you?
I'm thinking about some friends of mine that I knew from college who were spiritual but not religious. Like their religion, like was music, being a member of the music department, practicing for dozens and dozens of hours every week. And I would just hear them say comment. So like a friend of mine would post about politics and have a very have a very political take. And then in the comments, a music friend of mine would say, just focus on the music, man. Like that's the thing that matters. Just focus on the music,
Hmm.
and you'll be okay. And these are spiritual but not religious people. And musicians can be in that stage their whole lives because they're constantly surrounded by this enchantment. They're explorers, they're boundary pushers, they're doing the same things that a lot of the eat, pray, love,
Hmm.
type of ayahuasca trip folks doing that. I'm exploring the soul, I'm exploring myself,
Yeah.
and so they do that with music, right?
Yep.
And it's pretty rare for someone um, to land on a dogma or a religion out of that process. It usually just sort of stays in this spirit without body sort of way of living and thinking.
Yeah. And that's something I would want to challenge to some extent. I've thought a lot about because I've really actually been in a similar place to that. I really quite resonate with that. I maybe didn't go all the way to there is no God, but I really did ha what was found myself at a place where it was hard to know what was what with no ability to test the spirits. But one of the things I'd love to get your perspective on is well, and this will eventually get into the muses and how it maybe worked for pre-modern folks. But there is something that I feel like I eventually figured out that was disappointing to me was I think when I started playing music, writing music, I conceived of it as self-expression in a really pretty pure sense where, I was going into my bedroom, I was writing, and what was I in touch with? I was in touch with me, my emotions, my story, and I was expressing that out into the world from within. But what was almost shocking to realize was that there was actually so many things, even in the music world that were working on me, and people will discover this, ooh, the history of, the history of jazz or the history of rock or whatever. They'll discover that there was some spiritual forces, and maybe we'll use that word narrative, some narrative that was working on me. And oh my goodness, I didn't come up with rock music. Actually, rock music is a tradition, which is a type of shock to people because it seems like it was an anti-tradition, but like, you realize where is the snare supposed to be? And like it's not infinite options. Like it's two and four generally and some wiggle room. And you're locked into a world rather than this infinitely explorable world, right?
Yes.
And I think people are finding themselves there, realizing that there was, something working on them. And there's a number of stories that are really breaking this, that that type of individualism in songwriting and music creation is really only going so far. And really now we're admitting, if you press into the best artists today, most of them, if you interview them, they will eventually say, well, I was like in touch with something. Some will use the word muse, but there's this famous story. Do you know Justin Vernon he's was in a band called Bon Iver. It's kind of like a
Mm,
self. Do you know who that is at all?
no.
Um, Good for you. I mean, his music is fine. Go check it out if you would like. But there's a story about him where he goes off into the woods, and there's a pretty famous record that he made, and he made it basically by himself, and he's off into the woods, and that it's just this very bottom up. I made it myself. I found myself, and here's the music that helped me get there. But over time, what typically happens, I wish I had like had a quote from him or something like that. But there'll be a researching for that type of experience. And you'll kind of then have to repeat the story of going to find yourself for the next album, just going to and and then you kind of realize that actually no, I wasn't purely in control expressing myself, but there was something that was working on me from above. Sometimes it's like a breakup, that was working on you from above, my situation. Um, so so again, then we're ready to admit that there's something deeply spiritual happening when we're making music. There is that, I love that word you used. There's an orientation there. So ancient people thought of this, very differently. And I think one of the helpful ways to get into that a little bit, that you have so much to offer, is just about the muses. What are the muses? How did people think about it? I remember you also had you specifically had talked about Plato before, and something from Ion. Anyway, I'm just trying to trigger your memory from, again, previous conversations.
Yeah, so before I talk about them, Bob Dylan I've seen him being circled around a lot for a famous quote with respect to songs he wrote and ascribing the source to beyond to external. So I'll just read this. This is Bob Dylan has described songwriting as a process where songs appear to come from an external source, like, quote, falling down from space or being out there and needing to be caught, rather than self-generated.
Hmm.
And There's another conversation that I just had with Karen Wong and Caleb, KJ Compendium on X, and so Karen shows this video of, and he's a professor, I think his name is Arthur Brooks, maybe. And this professor, Arthur Brooks, is giving this lecture, and he critiques what you're critiquing, and he points the finger at 19th century romanticism, where there's this view of the artist creating something, like that. That's the expression of the artist's creation instead of like a top-down kind of a thing. And so he says, no, it's not creation. It's tapping into the potentiality that was already created, right?
Mm,
And so there's potential. Um, and there's a I think his name is Harold Best. I think he's a theologian of the arts. And there's an article I read of his where he talks about the theology of creativity, where God creates ex nihilo. God creates out of nothing.
mm,
We who are made in the imago Dei, in the image of God, we create ex creatio. And
mm,
creativity is part of that being in the image of God, to use the things God has made, that potentiality, tapping into that potentiality to, let's say, artifice or to form things. And so, because we already have this template that we're born into, planet Earth, we have the seasons, we're in this atmosphere, the human ear hears between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. Like, there's all these physical parameters. You're already operating in some sort of hierarchy of perception, just de facto. And
hmm
that's already shaping the kinds of things that we produce. And then more going into it as culture, more going into it as time, right? More going into it as ecology and place. Like there's reasons I told Caleb in that conversation, there's a reason that the didgeridoo as an instrument was developed by Aboriginal Australians because that's tied to ecology, the physical materials that are there,
Yeah.
and it's tied to the stories of their people, and that it did not develop in Africa or Europe or China. But in the Middle East, you have the oud, right? And that developed there, right? Didn't develop in Australia. So there's contingencies that are already shaping our hierarchies of perception and what we do with that. And so what we're doing is playing with potentialities that are already coming down upon us. So what I'm trying to do is before we go to muse and like spirit possession or whatever, there are things that are just always there shaping us, right? And so I think that helps us get out of the sacred that whole what do they call it? The secret sacred self sort of perception a little
Yeah.
bit. And so that means we are responding to things outside ourselves already in the creative process.
Yeah. And we've really gone, quite far in trying to push back against those to say that those limitations are made up or imposed on us again because we don't like the top down. Any imposition is bad. A lot of people don't know some in our, maybe small circles, people know some of the popular contemporary music in academia today, really modern, hyper modern, uh, essentially noise music, and really trying so hard to break out from the imposition of even, if my to bring my mom back again, if she were to hear some of the music that is trying to push back against those impositions, she would just say, "This is nonsense. I don't enjoy this at all. I can't follow it. There is no pattern." And in large part, I think that is because we have rejected any limitation from outside. Does seem to be that there is that temptation to try to get beyond it, and it really has created some bizarre things and some bizarre, yeah, just some bizarre pieces. But yeah, that concept of limitation, I think that's what gets us kind of upset about it because it's not, it's not us. And yeah, we don't like limitations, which to be fair, yeah, I guess I suppose I don't like limitations either. I think that's maybe, part of human nature or something like that. This is the what I thought you were gonna bring up with Bob Dylan was his song when he became a Christian. I think right away, the first album, he had this song called "Serve Somebody," and that was really the very claim. And this is what I thought you were going to bring up was the song just says you're going to have to serve somebody,
Mm.
um, and and yeah, I mean, I think that that's really true. There is no just pure isolated self. You are going to serve somebody. Artists that get record labels, they realize this actually the fastest. There's a lot of stories of songwriters who think they're individualists and they make an album and they release it maybe themselves, but then oh, they get a record deal and they got $1 million for the record deal, but then they submit the next record and the business executive says, no, that's not what the market wants. And then yeah, right away you have to make this decision. Who am I going to serve here? There's tons of stories about that problem. But even if you solve it, even if you say a lot of today we have the quote unquote independent artist, the social media influencer, but those folks are realizing that they have an algorithm to
Yeah.
to serve, and they can't just the algorithm has a set of desires that they will need to serve. And so again, let's test the spirits. Is the algorithm, is that good?
Mm.
What's in that algorithm? What does it want? And and so yeah, again, you're left with this question, who are you going to serve? You're going to have to serve somebody. Um, so again, with ancient folks, um, how did they interact with the muses? Because they were in some ways advantaged to explicitly name them. I'm
Right. Um, so the world of ancient Greece and then the world that was inherited by early Christianity and the scholastics and then into the Middle Ages. Um, yes, there was philosophy, but it was still heavily poetic and embodied. And so you wouldn't talk about virtue in abstract. You would say um, Lady Mercy, right? Or
mm,
Fortune,
mm,
Fortuna is
hmm
a person, right? And it's hard. It's hard. I don't interact with fortune or fate as a person. I interact with it as an abstract idea. Well, good luck. Um, the advantage well, I'll not advantage, but um, how do I say this? People can grasp things through stories, and so if a virtue is allegorically portrayed as a female figure, well, that's already there's so much that's you're catching there that's not explicitly being taught there. Um, and so yeah, so the muses um, were classically categorized. They were deities. They were nine daughters of Zeus by their mother named Memory. That's where we get the word memory from. So you have Memory and you have Zeus, and they have these nine daughters, and they are named by Hesiod, and Hesiod is like our earliest, let's say, canonical poet who really gives us the pantheon of ancient Greece, their origin stories. Um, and what's really interesting is that he spends like it's like a tithe of his text is on the Muses. Like the whole, it's very common for Greek poets to give an opening incantation or invocation to the muses, even a one sentence, help me muse to remember all these things. Um, he gives like a whole first 1.5 chapters essentially on the muses and his own origin story as a poet being so indebted to the muses. And I would encourage anyone to just go look it up for free. It's a free text. You can find Hesiod, Theogony, and then it's just the whole first like 120 verses essentially are about the Muses and who they were and how Hesiod himself became a poet. And in that story, it's also kind of odd that this poet is putting himself into this pantheon, into his story of the gods. Um, well, that in itself there's a lesson that's trying to be
hmm
stated there too about the nature of poetry and about his own status. Um, so there's a really important line that Homer, a contemporary of Hesiod, they use the same line, and scholars argue, did Homer say it first or did Hesiod say it first? But the same line is that. Um, basically musicians and singers are on the earth because of the muses, right? So both Homer and Hesiod both say this line. Um, but Hesiod gives a really interesting description about the muses where they can tell truth, but they can also tell things that are not true as if they were true. And that's like a self-description of the muses. They say that to Hesiod. And
Wait,
scholars have argued,
say that one more time because that was a
well, so I'll just read it directly. Um,
While you're looking that up,
Yeah.
I just to um, put an exclamation point on that. Like one place that we see, because you said indebted to the muses, it made me think of when we when a singular artist wins an award, like at the Grammys, they get up there and they accept the award, but then what do? They are forced to be in this place where they say who they're indebted to. You know,
Yeah.
I want to thank my mom. I want to thank my wife. Um, and it's this really quite an interesting thing for everyone to watch because we have the stories that are told about the way these things were made, but then it's like this little moment where they reveal that they have received something from those around them, and it's like, are they going to thank God? Like if they're a Christian, at the Dove Awards. I actually have never seen the Dove Awards, but I hope that everyone gets up there. I want to thank God, and then, but it's this little interesting moment where it's like, who are you going to thank? Who are you going to be to say you are indebted to? And it's interesting that they have, yeah, names, personifications, spiritual beings that have real shapes and characteristics that they're saying, this worked on me.
Yeah. So I have the text up here. Uh, let's say I'll start here. Um, it says this, and first he gives the first 20 verses are about the muses, and then he says picks it up here. And one day the muses, taught me Hesiod, singing glorious song while I was shepherding my lambs under holy Helicon. And this word first the goddesses said to me, the muses, quote, shepherds of the wilderness, wretched things of shame, mere bellies. And this is what the muses say about themselves. We know how to speak many false things as though they were true,
Mm,
but we know when we will to utter true things.
mm,
And
mm.
many
That's
scholars
interesting.
have tried to read into that, and what they're trying to say is that many scholars have argued that what's being said here is that the muses are um, first of all knowledge is in the purview of the muses. Um, so if what you're writing or putting forth is in the domain of things that are known, the muses, by virtue of them being the daughters of memory and Zeus, that is their domain. Like they remember everything.
Hmm.
And then those two halves, things that are false as though they were true, and those that are true, people have sort of basically tried to say this is fiction here and this is nonfiction here, like storytellers through allegory and metaphor, but not necessarily, let's say, factual. And then over here, things that are factual, like it
Mm,
all is within their domain.
hmm. Hmm.
And then I think the story that comes next is interesting. So I'll just keep reading. Um, Hesiod writes, and then they plucked and gave me a rod, a laurel rod, a marvelous thing, and they breathed into me a divine voice to celebrate things that shall be and things that were before. And they bade me to sing of the race of the gods that are eternal, but ever to sing of themselves, the muses, both first and last. Um, and so in here, it shows how Hesiod, he used to be a shepherd, and the muses, and he was a shepherd on the mountain where the muses live. And so that's why he's even in the story. And the muses notice him and they say, "You're a shepherd, you're a mere belly. You are of the just world." What they do is they breathe into him. That's the word inspiration is where it comes from. To be inspired
Mm,
is to receive the breath.
hmm.
So they give him a rod, which symbolizes authority, and they give him a breath. And what does the breath do? The way he describes is they taught him song. So poetry is not just what we think of as poetry today, of recited or written prose. clever ways,
mm,
maybe. That might be a cheap way of describing poetry. I mean, no
mhm,
offense to those who are poets. Um, but this is much more oral and even melodic,
mhm,
harmonic, I should say, of what we mean by poetry. This is why a lot of people will refer to them as bards rather than strictly as poets,
mm,
um, because they're singers and reciters of poetry and things like that. So there's this inspiration that's happening, and it says that they breathed into me a divine voice to celebrate things that will be and things that were before. So there's this thing about time, there's this thing about story. Greek poetry places so much emphasis on the heroic deeds of athletes and military heroes, um, and because there's this celebrating
mhm,
emphasis, past, present, and future. And so there's this whole idea of future and past that the muses are also in the domain of. So they're also in their purview is history. And later on, when in the Greek intellectual tradition, when like, let's call it quote unquote secular histories start to emerge, like these are the first historical texts that are just trying to lay things out as they happened historically without reference to what some god did. Um, so I think it's Herodotus is considered the
mm,
first historian, and he writes this big anthology of I think he writes about the wars, but um, uh, he doesn't refer to the muses or gods at all. It's just like let's call it human history. But
mm,
his editors, maybe they didn't like that because they actually
mm,
then each of the chapters or each of the books of his works are one of the nine muses. It's
mm,
like they named it after the muses because they wanted to make sure that they had the final stamp. Because what Hesiod says here in this Theogony poem is he says they gave me the authority as a poet, and they gave me the voice and the breath to receive this revelation, to tell of the gods and what they do. But first and last is the muses,
mm,
and they are his primary benefactors.
mm,
Um, and so the muses are, yeah, that they come up throughout the corpus. And they become this fixture, this symbol of knowledge, of astronomy, of history, certainly of poetry. Like they're also singers. I'm not reading that part in Hesiod's work here, but they're known as singers and dancers. And so in later tradition, each of the nine muses gets assigned a specific discipline. So one of them is the muse of astronomy, that's Urania. Another is the muse of history. Another is the muse of comedy. Another is of tragedy. One is of lyrical songs. This one is of hymns. This one is the muse, and so they're all assigned a discipline, but all of them sing and
mm,
all of them dance. And so the thing that binds everything together is what we end up calling music. And so the word music comes from the muses, and the word literally means the art, the techne
mm,
of the muses. Um,
mm,
and so there's baked into that word is this entire poetic history and word associations that we do not integrate into when we talk about music. And
mm.
so there's kind of let's on a very meta level a demusicking of the word music in terms of its word
Yeah.
associations, and let's call it the Overton window, or let's call it the when I say music, what do you think of? You think of
Mm,
songs and you think of like pitch or something like that, but you're not thinking of you're not thinking of the cosmos and the
mhm,
wider world and all intellectual pursuits, right? That's
mhm,
ultimately in their purview as well. So I'll pause there, but that's sort of a snapshot of my understanding of the Muses pre, let's say pre-Augustine.
mm. To our listeners, don't say we didn't ever teach you about anything. There's no way that you dear listener knew all of that. That was great. So much just education there, but it's also there's these little signs from us. Some of the things I'm trying to pull out here is we are doing a lot of the same things. Yet when we say that something is inspired, we really, especially when we're describing music that's inspired, the even this lower definition of music, what we mean is something more like it received the breath of God. There's something about it that is that we're actually quite like them in many ways. Even though this way of thinking kind of seems bizarre, there's these little hints that we still are living in their world in many ways. I wanted to tell you a story. I told you I was going to share this story. So I recently had this amazing opportunity to go to Turkey, and we were on a study tour with my church. And a lot of the teachings, it was really cool. We were in these Greek theaters, these old, and we're talking about Greek gods and Roman gods. And I learned, so much history there. But there's this moment I've been thinking about that I just wanted to tell you this story. I think you would find it fascinating, and it just gets at a core thing of, I think, what we're exploring. So our pastor was talking about the Greek gods, and it was some bizarre stories. To us, they seem very bizarre, and I don't know if there was, human sacrifice in there or not, but I mean, in intense stories too, stories with stakes that were, and yeah, the cultures, they seemed so bizarre. And our pastor just asked this really brilliant question that I think just got at the heart of what this kind of has to teach us. So he asked our whole group, just all people from our church, all modern people, still very materialist, many of us, even though Christians, we kind of have that frame. And our pastor asked, he said, "Are they crazy? Were they crazy to believe in these things, to act this this way, to see that the gods were working on them, to see that the muses or the gods were asking things of them, saying, go do this, go sacrifice this." And he asked, were they crazy? And then he just let it hang out there. And it was just kind of quiet. We're in this Greek theater trying to enter their worldview. And a whole bunch of people were like, well, yes, none of the gods were real. And I just loved the way our pastor did it. He let us wrestle with the problem, because the something was was acting upon these people. It was clear. They were acting out. They were doing things in their on the ground material life based on the things that they believed about the gods. There was, if there was nothing there, it almost didn't matter in a way, because they were living it out on the ground level. They believed it, to put it, this is a funny Jordan Peterson thing that just came to mind. They acted as if the gods were real, right? I mean,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
they they lived it out. To
yeah.
them, it was real. And he just let us hang with it. And a bunch of people said, no, it's all fake. None of it's real. But there was this guy there that he offered so many great insights. But one of the things you would love about him, so he's a very, you might say, enchanted fellow. Like, for an example, also, I'll probably send this to him. So hi, Tim, if you're listening. Um, he likes to study things like the Nephilim a lot. He's starting to ask some interesting questions about the way this world works. And yeah, he's thinking about angels. Like, what is an angel? And so after it just after this question of are they crazy just hung out there for a little bit, Tim goes, no, they weren't crazy. Like there's spiritual warfare and it's like real. It's happening in like the heavenly places and it's like it's acting on us and it's acting on them and like we're the same. And man, it was just like it just snapped
Mm,
how clear of a like no this is still happening today. And I'm using these examples of the record label executive, all these top down forces, but even those are hints at something else. That
yeah.
there is real spirits, and you can start to notice them, and you can start to notice their effects. And yeah,
Mm,
again, in some ways, those personifications were
mhm,
helpful. They gave certain limits, whereas today, the record label executive is like the highest god. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess above that, we would start to say like give capitalism or something a capital C, which it is makes makes a lot of sense that because yeah, even the record label, you realize, oh, he has to serve somebody.
mm,
And it just goes on and on and on. And so yeah, here we are needing to discern the spirit. So let's say, you have a friend who's now there. Maybe they, are how have you dealt with, I mean, you're a Christian. Answer this as a Christian, really. Permission granted to answer this as a Christian. You can even go in apologetics mode if you want, but even just, as Drew, maybe I'll phrase it, why is this good news rather than bad news to have to serve somebody?
yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, well, I was I made the mistake of indulging a back and forth with some anon guy on X. Um,
Always a bad idea.
but he somehow the conversation got to because he was trying to argue like why is it that when a baby is pushed through like the birthing canal, right? That suddenly some mystical thing happens where the state now owns that baby, right? Like, you
Mm,
and he was asking a very like visceral question about agency and autonomy and like who is the person versus who is the state. And he was trying to say that the state is this abstract idea that's not real, but the
mm,
body, flesh and bone baby is real. But
mhm,
why is it that when they cross this threshold, now suddenly this like abstract thing sort of sweeps in and now claims that baby. And I, I kind of I thought where he was going with that was like a libertarianism kind of
mm, mhm,
open, but like borders shouldn't matter because people should just be free to live and do whatever they would like to do as an individual. And libertarianism is based on like the individual is the highest good, like the
mhm,
freedom of the individual, insofar as you're not limiting the freedoms of other individuals, right? That's the ethical like way that they navigate that. And so, but I don't believe that. And like I believe that um, I believe that there are moral facts, right? And I do believe that what you do, like I do believe that what is going on in your head actually does matter to society to some degree. Like your most private of thoughts, because what I believe as a Christian is, right, out of the heart the mouth speaks,
mm,
right? And so what's going on in your heart actually kind of does matter. It matters to God. And and so. the way I took that conversation with that user on X was, um, well, who's going to guarantee the rights of that individual, right? Who takes on
Yeah.
the burden of guaranteeing rights to this person, to justice? Well, it can't be the individual, right? The
Hmm.
individual is going to lose in that in this Hobbesian, like, what's that movie when all the laws just stop for a day and it's just, things like that. Um, so there, and then I was also taking the idea that, like, well, what do you mean by an entity? Like a family is a unit, right?
Hmm.
A city is a unit. That's a body. The word corporation is based on the word body,
Hmm.
corpos, right? And things scale up, and so we find ourselves not as independent of one another or from our place and time and society, but interdependent, right? And the analogy that
Mm.
I used was in the realm of atoms and molecules, right? So like an atom, I'm going to get my science totally wrong here. I never aced that class, but an atom, um, atoms form molecules. Like a molecule is made up of several different kinds of atoms, right? But then a chemical is with several molecules, right? And so, well, why do you privilege the atom over the chemical, right? Or over the molecule, right? These are all irreducible complexities at certain levels, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so, uh, I think it's good news that I am not just an atom floating around doing atomized things, living in atomized reality, but that I am meant to bond with
Yeah.
others to form, you know, molecules and greater irreducible complexities. Like, in fact, I am meant to do that. And music is one of those evidences that we are meant to do that, because like, music wouldn't exist if communities didn't exist. Like, you must have community, and music is inherently a structuring art form. You must zone in. You must be in tune with one another
Yeah.
and with what the music is directing you to do. Now, this touches on an earlier part of the conversation. Not all music, right? Like that whole idea of discerning the spirits. Like, not all music is equally good or valuable music.
Hmm.
All music does point you somewhere, but the ends it's pointing you to are not all good.
Hmm.
And it does do that through sound. And and I do believe that music is a phenomenology of spirit. So when you think about how
Yeah.
music works on you, it comes in from the outside and it enters in. And it does that through this invisible means, so we can't see it, but it is all around us. So there's this omnipresence to music.
Mhm.
Um, and and
Faith,
what is it? Yeah,
sorry, just faith comes through hearing. We we s-
yeah.
we for us Christians, we think of that in a Christian faith, but I think that there's that in a lot of ways that works for other faiths as well. It's sounded. We listen to the spirits and we you can't plug your ears for forever. And so yeah, it's sounded to us. And so yeah, faith, yeah, comes through hearing.
Right, right. So in our experiences with music, the sound occurs, it comes in and it plugs into your nervous system, and then what starts to happen? Like, if you're either you reject it for X, Y, and Z reasons that I think are ultimately spiritual. Like, your spirit is not in line with the spirit of the music and the ends for what the music is pointing you to. I think that's why we dislike certain music. Or if your spirit is in line with the spirit of the music, then you'll start to move to it. You'll start to dance to it. You'll start to move your body to it. Okay, now if you just watched yourself on mute, like turn the sound off, and you just watch a person
Yeah.
swaying and listening to music, I mean, what is that?
Yeah.
That is like something's moving that person. You know what I mean? That's not just you in your own agency moving, right? So, and then your body will contort or move based on the flow of the music. And so, Well, there's a spirit in the music that's like kind of animating you in that like in that sense. And so like you start to think like, oh my gosh, is this like spirit possession of some kind, when we are engaging in music, or is it one sort of transposed version of spirit possession that it's like our way of ritualizing that we're recognizing that this is a part of what it means to be a human and that there are spirits and that we do this corporately with other people, and that brings us that spirit, one spirit unites many people together through common sounds that we are all perceiving individually, yet it's one spirit moving us in concert together, right? So there is this sort of togetherness happening there. And then the final thing I want to say is um, biblically, there is no word for music because we've been using this word music, which we've received from the Greeks, but biblically, the word for music is praise. And there's this recognition that
Hmm.
that music is always outward.
Hmm.
Uh, and
Hmm.
praise is what we give to God, right? And so there's so anyway, so there's something there and also there like this came up when I was asking what is the symbolism of the king who sings? Like what is this like that's a
Yeah.
motif that you see in certain things like the Lord of the Rings, like Aragorn. He
Yeah.
sings this song at the end. David, right? King
Hmm.
David the singer. Like it's this motif that we see. I have a picture of David playing a lute and singing. It's like, what is that symbolism? You think about the king who receives song versus the king who is giving song.
Yeah.
What is the symbolic difference there? And I think one of the things that symbolizes is that if you're going to sing, that means that you yourself are submitting to the laws of the music and the spirit of that music. You are not above that. And
Hmm.
so the king is entering in lower and participating in it. And the thing is, when you sing, what you're giving is outward. It's not for you. Like it's always pointed this way. It's going
Yeah.
away from and so it's something that's rendered, it's something that's given, it's something that's presented as a sacrifice or as a gift or as an offering. And so it symbolizes the king is himself subservient to this greater order and is sort of, so anyways, that's I
Yeah.
wanted to put that in there too.
Oh man. That's so brilliant. I see that as such a distinct as yeah, such a distinct thing about Christianity about and about the Bible's world where submitting to God, even you think of Paul and Silas singing in prison, there's this joy that cannot be contained in the worst of circumstances because you you are owned by a king who is good. You just it's what happens. You sing out and you praise no matter what. And that is it's an unbelievable thing to consider that. And I think yeah, to that is why it is good news to not be your own. It's kind of contingent on if the spirit above you is good or or not. And I think in Christ you find out that he is so good. And so I think that's my, kind of invitation, pastoral invitation to folks to find out how good he is, and singing will just be the byproduct. I wanted to bring up one more thing that I just thought of as we were talking earlier, and it's the Heidelberg Catechism, and the question one for Lord's Day one. What is your only comfort in life and in death? That's the question, and the answer is that I am not my own, but
Hmm.
belong body and soul in life and in death to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. That really is I find myself wanting celebrate that I'm not my own and sing that. We actually sing a song here in here at church that is called I Am Not My Own. And I love it's so refreshing singing it because it's actually quite a relief to realize that okay, yes, I'm not my own. I'm gonna, Christianity actually we go even further and the scriptures go further and we say, actually, I'm a slave to Christ. Talk about an image of servanthood, of not being our own. But we find that it's good news. What is your only comfort in life and in death? And I mean, what an interesting way to answer. But I am not my own. That's my only comfort. People will because otherwise you are left asking,
Mm.
you're left with an unanswerable question, unable to discern the spirits, but to be Christ's is such a comfort. He's the creator, not just of the universe, but he is the creator. He holds the whole cosmos in his hands, and it's so much better to release and give up control. And man, that's just a beautiful thing. So let put a bow on it for us here. Give us some closing thoughts here.
Gonna be a pretty big bow. So Burn Power is a friend of mine online. Lots of our mutuals would probably know him. I recently watched one of his videos, and he was talking about even scientifically, we have proven, or at least there's convincing evidence that at the if you get to the absolutely fundamental lowest level of particular matter, reality is relationships.
Hmm.
It's these particles dancing. It's not a static entity. And he extrapolates that all the way back up to music. And um, I think what I'm thinking of the person who feels alone and still turns to music for their comfort.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking of how if you take that, if you truly believe in the materialist, the universe narrative of causes, and I am a cause, and um, I'm an atomized unit, that libertarian narrative of being an atomized individual, music has nothing for you. Like music doesn't come from that. That's not where music comes from.
Yeah.
Music heals you from that, right? And one of the things that music is teaching us is that a lone note can't make a melody.
Yep.
Um, and if you view now in the sea of humanity, of the billions and billions of people that are alive today and have ever existed, like we are a note, right? And we are a note in this symphony of the cosmos. What music teaches us is the meaning is found across time in the relationships between the notes.
Hmm.
And the thing that's at the top of that hierarchy, the spirit of the music that the music is pointing us to, is only ascertainable through all of those relationships working together, being oriented towards that spirit.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so my bow would be to be atomized and to live in that libertarian sense of individualism that doesn't point to any telos or any purpose, is to not be in tune with reality as it
Yeah.
actually is.
Yeah.
Um, and what music teaches us, you might you might think it's wrong, but I think what music is teaching us as a human art form is we need to tune in first, for one thing. Like there's something that we need to leave behind in order for us to access it, just for one thing. Um, and that there is a that there is that there is an order that structures your life towards the good and the beautiful that's only accessible when you have done that proper orienting, that proper tuning in, and that there's still even more joy to be had when you yourself are engaged in participating in that song, right? So now we're adding
Yeah,
another layer there.
totally.
You are now one with it on a more intimate level. But then there's also the next layer of doing it. The community and the cosmos that the music symbolizes then becomes on another level actualized in community with other people. So now the spirit of the music and the spirit of the people becomes this sort of one spirit. Um, uh, Returning again to my point earlier that all of those notes need to be oriented in the service of the spirit. So all the people being oriented together in the service of the one spirit of God, that brings the harmony and the good and the true and the beautiful to our lives.
Hmm.
That was my attempt at a bow.
Oh, you nailed it. Drew, thank you so much for doing this. We will surely do this again. I have, hopefully, I think I can announce this. Otherwise, I'll just edit this out. But hopefully, I think I have a interview hopefully soon with the CEO of Awana. I think I told you that, which will be cool. We're going to talk about, the theme of transposition, teaching the scriptures all the way down to children's level. There's hugely complex things in the Bible, and then all of us, the claim is that we can teach them all the way down, transpose them all the way down to kids. So maybe keep a lookout for that if you are listening. Anything else? I don't know that you mentioned the title of your blog. I still want to send people that way. Go.
Musica Apologia.
Yep, Substack. And so be sure to follow Drew there. And Drew, thanks so much. What a treat. What a pleasure.
Thanks, Brantley.